different groups enjoy different things, and each player brings their own influence to the group dynamic, and it changes how the game plays out. Knowing how to get your group active and involved is a DM skill that has great importance. Which is why today I'm musing on Gallivan Family's question about how to manage player dynamics. In his case, particularly in a West Marches game where the players change from week to week, and in his case he has 50 players in his group. Talk about a masterclass on the subject. If you're new to the channel, these musing videos are sort of a staple, where I take a question that's been posed by somebody in the community and muse on an answer for them when the question is selected in polls by our tank class supporters here on YouTube or over on Patreon. If you want to get a question answered, all you have to do is subscribe and ask. Being a tank class supporter is not required, though obviously it lets you vote in the polls, and so it increases your chances of getting your topic at the top of the list. So what even are player dynamics? Player dynamics is basically the way that your group involves together and meshes in order to impact how the entirety of the game is run. When we're talking about group dynamics, we're talking about how adding one player in or taking one away can change the feel at your table in ways that doesn't necessarily seem like it makes sense. It's not just that you remove the loudmouth out of the room and so everybody else is a little bit less quiet, but sometimes you remove one player and another player starts talking more, or you add in a player and people start talking less. People might have more difficulties or less difficulties with choosing directions when in certain group makeups, and essentially it's just a social construct and social thing about how putting all these different people together and then asking them to go on a quest changes how they interact with the story and preparation that you're putting out there. It's all really based on, in my opinion, the way that people are choosing to have fun and the things that excite them, the things that draw them in, the things that push them away. And not only is that something that you can control to some degree on the DMing side of the table, but it's also something that impacts from a player standpoint as each person pushes on the other people around them because of their likes and dislikes, which means it's an incredibly complicated topic that Gallivan Family has gone ahead and thrown in here for us, and it's not one that we're going to be able to just solve to a perfect stance. And instead, we really just have to figure out how we can impact the game when the players at our table have such a strong impact on one another. And part of that, I think, comes down to understanding your players. It sounds like Gallivan Family does a great job of trying to keep track of the wishes and dreams and the motivations and the consequences that his players have drawn in for themselves for their characters. And yet it still becomes a real challenge when you've got, a cadre of 50 people that could randomly drop in at any time. And so part of it is understanding the kind of fun that people are having, and another part is figuring out how to push on that kind of fun on a week-for-week basis by actually focusing on the style of fun and putting opportunities for each style into the game, especially in a West Marches game where you're going to be rotating players. Understanding fun is a weird topic that doesn't have a lot of correlations. It doesn't necessarily have a ton of information that's just going to tell you how to help your players have fun. But one of the things that I found most helpful for trying to understand the topic was the Angry GM, a blogger's posts on the MDA Approach, which was a study put out about video games that basically broke down the kinds of fun that people have into 8 different categories. Those categories were sensory pleasure, which involves like the enjoyment that you get from maps and minis and moving things around and physically touching props and that sort of thing in D&D. Fantasy, which is the giving up of the real world and immersing yourself in something special and wonderful and different. Narrative, which is the desire to have a well-told story that's structured in the right kind of manner to deliver a enjoyable narrative. Challenge, where you want some actual obstacles between you and success that you can push through and overcome, and show skill in the process. Fellowship, which is largely all about the group dynamic in the first place, and is about people enjoying being around other people and trying to find that camaraderie. Discovery, which is about learning new things, which is in D&D often the player that enjoys the exploration phase more than anything else, and is delving into learning the lore and the backstory and the little pieces of information, or finding out what's behind every little corner. And expression, which is kind of almost ubiquitous in D&D nowadays, which is the desire to express your self-creativity and the joy and pleasure that you get from doing so. And then abnegation, which has rightly been dumbed down from that fancy awesome word into submission, which is basically just the desire to be a part of something and just kick back and not have to think so darned hard. This set of styles of fun are all notes that you can focus on inputting into your campaign and into every individual session of your game in order to be able to draw out the players that have the specific kind of fun. And so by understanding what your players' preferences are, and by including these notes across the board, it lets you have some impact on how the group interacts with your game, because you can keep track of the primary style of fun that each player enjoys. Then you can, on the fly and in your preparation, understand what kind of note you need to put out in order to draw that individual player into your campaign a little bit deeper and get them acting and active in the story that you're telling. It's important to remember that when we are talking about these styles of fun and the like, that people are not one-note NPCs. And so while there will probably be a primary style of fun that each player at your table enjoys, that doesn't mean that they don't enjoy a little piece of all of the others, or primarily several of them and very little on others. You don't have to worry when you're putting this together that if you put in some kind of sensory pleasure item, like handing out a fancy prop that you've spent a little bit of time on and it's got a nice tactile feel to and it looks great, handing out that prop doesn't mean that only the sensory pleasure player is going to be drawn in and focused on it. It just means that they are going to get more of a charge out of it than, say, somebody who was primarily there for a challenge and looking for a nasty fight for the day. So don't feel like you can't include something just because everybody doesn't show a strong interest. Just realize that if you've got somebody who is very uninterested in a specific style, that you're going to need to include a solid mix in order to be able to keep everybody engaged and focused on what's happening at your table. When you're dealing with this in a West Marches campaign, you are dealing with a lot of different personalities. I still recommend keeping track of these 8 different categories and trying to spend some time in like an after action report. I have one that you can use that you could modify in order to be focused on these 8 styles of fun. Focus on finding out what each of your players is most interested in, and that's still valuable information for you to use on an ad hoc, on the fly basis in order to draw people in when they seem like they might be leaning back a little bit. But when it comes to actually preparing using the West Marches approach, you're not necessarily going to know who's going to show up from given week to given week. And so instead, what you're trying to do is hit a broad array of notes in your preparation. You want to hit all the pillars of play. You want to hit all 8 of these, or rather 6 of them, because fellowship and abnegation sort of take care of themselves. Abnegation, at least, is just sort of like wanting to lean back, so that's not too bad. Fellowship, you want to offer opportunities for the group to interact together, so that's still something that you can focus in on. But by including opportunities for these different styles of fun in every session as much as possible, and just sort of spreading a wider net, you're going to run a more consistently enjoyable, leveled out out sort of even flow of the game. You might not get the same kind of highs that you're going to get by using this approach on an individual table where you can drill down tightly on the specific players, but you're going to get a long-term, enjoyable game that doesn't drive you as the DM absolutely nuts trying to individualize week for week on these individual players that are just dropping in at the last minute. Gallivan's family, I hope this was helpful to you, and thanks everybody for watching all the way through. You are the best, and I appreciate you. As always, if you'd like to be directing the action and deciding what it is that we're going to muse on next, then consider joining us here on YouTube or over on Patreon and becoming a Tank Class supporter so that you can vote in the tank-only polls. But until then, thanks for watching. Happy adventuring.